My girlfriend looked me right in the eye and said, "My friends think you're just dead weight." I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just nodded and told her, "Well, then stop carrying me." And with that, I walked out the door without another word. But it was what one of her buddies muttered right after that truly turned her smile upside down. "Look, I'm 34 years old, and up until recently, I'd been in this relationship for 2 whole years. I just learned the hard way that sometimes the absolute quickest way to lose someone is to let them think they've already won the game." We actually met through a mutual acquaintance at one of those corporate networking events. She was 31 at the time, incredibly ambitious, and climbed the ladder in corporate sales. She always had this tight-knit circle of friends from her college days buzzing around her. Me? I do freelance graphic design and consulting. That means my income kind of rides a roller coaster. Some months are absolutely killer, others are pretty damn slow. It's just the nature of the beast when you work for yourself, but it averages out to a really good living over the course of the year. That first year we spent together was rock solid. We'd spend our weekends just exploring the city, checking out new restaurants, and taking trips whenever we could swing it. Her friends were always in the picture, which didn't really bother me at first. But man, they were a loud, opinionated bunch. Every single get-together felt like a competition to see who had the flashiest story or the most impressive job promotion to brag about. I wasn't crazy about the vibe, but I put up with it because she seemed happy. Around our 1-year anniversary, though, the tide started to turn. Her friends began throwing these little passive-aggressive jabs my way. Just small digs at first, stuff you could easily brush off if you wanted to. They'd say things like, "Must be nice to have such a flexible schedule," or "Man, I wish I could just lounge around and work from home whenever I felt like it." Or they'd look at me and ask, "Do you ever actually wear anything besides jeans?" It was always delivered with a laugh, you know? Just vague enough that if I called them out on it, they could claim they were just joking. The worst part was that my girlfriend would laugh right along with them. Sometimes she'd even chime in, saying stuff like, "Oh yeah, he's super laid back about his job. He's definitely not a suit and tie kind of guy." It definitely stung, but I tried to rationalize it. I figured it was just her way of trying to fit in with her crowd. Then, about 6 months ago, those little jabs turned into sharp knives. One girl in particular, the undisputed ringleader of their little clique, started openly interrogating me about my career right at the dinner table. She'd say, "So, are you basically just unemployed between projects? It must be terrifying not having a steady paycheck. Don't you worry about your future?" I'd stay polite, explaining how the freelance world operates, talking about my regular clients and the projects I had lined up. But it didn't matter what I said. In their minds, they'd already decided I was beneath them. And during these cross-examinations, my girlfriend would just sit there in total silence. Or even worse, she'd change the subject in a way that made it feel like she agreed with them. Naturally, I started turning down invitations to hang out with them. I'd tell her I had tight deadlines to meet, which, to be fair, was usually the truth. So she'd go out without me, and she started coming home later and later, sometimes way past midnight. I'd be waiting up and ask her how her night went, and she'd just give me these vague, empty answers. It was fine, just the usual. You didn't miss anything. Last month, everything finally boiled over. She rolled into the apartment around 1 a.m. after a friend's birthday party. I was still sitting at my desk, burning the midnight oil on a project for a major client. She walked in, visibly tipsy, and practically collapsed onto the couch. She looked at me and said, "We need to talk about something." I saved my files, turned my chair around, and looked at her. "Okay," I said. "What's on your mind?" That's when she dropped it. "My friends think you're just dead weight." I felt this cold, heavy feeling settle right in the pit of my stomach. "Excuse me?" I asked. "They think you're holding me back," she said. "They feel like I'm doing all the heavy lifting emotionally, and that you aren't putting an equal amount of effort into this relationship." "Supporting me how, exactly?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, come on, you know what I mean," she scoffed. "I'm the one with the real, stable career. I'm the one who coordinates and plans everything we do. You just kind of exist." I just stared at her for a long moment. What do you think about this? What would you do if the person you loved looked at you and said you just existed? Finally, I asked her, is that what you actually think? Or is that just what they think? Does it even matter? She shot back. They see things from the outside that I might be too close to notice. So you're telling me your friends' opinions carry more weight than your own actual experience living with me in this relationship? That is not what I said, she muttered. But they do have a valid point. You just don't have the same kind of drive and ambition that I do. You're completely content just coasting along through life. I have corporate clients who pay me top dollar for highly specialized work, I told her. I have a real career. It just doesn't involve sitting in a cubicle like yours does. Since when did that become a massive issue? It's always been an issue, she snapped. I just kept my mouth shut before because I didn't want to hurt your feelings. But you're perfectly fine hurting them now? I'm just being honest with you, she said. They helped me realize that I deserve a partner who matches my level of energy. Someone who is actually going places in life. I nodded my head slowly, feeling this bizarre, eerie wave of calmness wash over me. Well, then don't carry me. She blinked, totally confused. What? I said, if I'm such a heavy load of dead weight, then stop carrying me. Problem solved. That's it? She asked, her voice cracking a bit. You're not even going to fight for us? Fight for us? I asked, letting out a dry laugh. You just sat there and told me your friends convinced you I'm completely worthless, and you sat there and agreed with them. What exactly am I supposed to be fighting for here? You're totally twisting my words around, she claimed. Am I really? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you've already decided I'm not good enough for you, and you're just using your friends as a shield to cover up your own doubts. Suddenly, she started backpedaling at top speed. I never said you weren't good enough. I'm just saying that maybe we aren't cut out for the long haul. Fine, I said. Then let's not be. You're really just throwing in the towel like that? No, I replied, standing up. I'm just accepting the reality of what you just told me. You don't respect my career. You don't respect the way I choose to live my life. Your friends have absolutely zero respect for me, and you've let them call the shots in your head. There is literally nothing left to fight for here. I walked straight into the bedroom and started throwing clothes into a duffel bag. She panicked and followed me in, her eyes wide. Where do you think you're going? I'm staying at a hotel tonight, I told her, zipping the bag. I'll find a short-term sublet sometime this week. We can sort out the paperwork and logistics later. You are seriously walking out on me over one single conversation? She cried. This isn't about one conversation, I said, looking right at her. This is about months and months of tiny cuts that you finally just admitted were completely intentional. I'm just saving us both a lot of wasted time. This is completely ridiculous, she said, shaking her head. You're being incredibly dramatic. Maybe I am, I said, but I'm also being real. You want someone who matches your corporate energy and high-flying ambition? Go out into the world and find him. Because I am absolutely done spending another year of my life being measured against your friends' boyfriends and constantly coming up short. I finished packing up my gear, grabbed my laptop, and gathered my work equipment. By this point, she was in full tears, begging me to stay so we could talk it through, insisting she didn't mean for it to come out the way it did. I just walked right past her, headed down the hallway, and grabbed the doorknob. Do me a favor, I said. Tell your friends that they won. And I walked out before she could even open her mouth to reply. To give you an update on what happened next. I checked into a hotel that night, but I barely slept a wink. My brain was stuck on a loop, replaying every single sentence of that argument, analyzing it from every angle, wondering if I had completely overreacted in the heat of the moment. But by the time the sun came up, I knew deep down I had made the right move. There's an old saying that goes, when someone shows you who they truly are, believe them the first time. She told me exactly how she viewed me, and everything else after that was just white noise. By Wednesday, I managed to lock down a month-to-month sublet. It was just a small, furnished studio apartment downtown. Nothing fancy by any means, but it was functional. Over the next couple of days, I'd head back to her place while she was stuck at the office to pack up the rest of my belongings. On my very last trip, I set my apartment key down on the kitchen counter, walked out, and sent her a text letting her know I was officially gone. My phone started ringing the exact second the text went through. I answered, and she immediately pleaded, "Can we please just sit down and talk face to face? I'm really not sure what's left to discuss," I told her. "I was drunk," she stammered, making excuses. "I was stressed out about some stuff at work, and I just took it out on you. I swear, I didn't mean a single word of what I said." "Which specific part didn't you mean?" I asked calmly. "The part where you called me dead weight? The part where your friends think I'm a loser who isn't good enough for you? Or the part where you stood there and agreed with every word they said?" "All of it," she sobbed. "I was just blowing off steam and everything came out totally wrong." "For 6 straight months?" I asked. There was a long pause on the line. "What?" "Your friends have been taking shots at me for half a year now," I said. "And you actively participated in it. This wasn't just one bad night where you had too many drinks. This was a consistent pattern." The phone went dead silent on her end. Then, in a quiet voice, she finally admitted, I know I've let them get inside my head too much. I know I should have had your back and defended you. I am so incredibly sorry." "I appreciate the apology," I told her. "But saying sorry doesn't change the fact that you let them convince you I was inadequate. It doesn't change the fact that deep down, you actually believe I'm holding you back in life." "I don't believe that," she whispered. "Not really." "Then why on earth would you say it?" "Because," she confessed, her voice cracking, "they just kept saying it over and over again, and I started to wonder if they were right." "But they're not right," she stammered over the phone. "I know they're not." I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easy. "How long did you sit there wondering, though?" I asked her. "How many months did you spend comparing me to their boyfriends, secretly deciding that I just didn't measure up to your little crowd?" Silence. Total, absolute silence on the other end of the line. "Yeah, that's exactly what I thought," I said, breathing out a sigh. "Look, I genuinely hope you find someone who finally meets their incredibly high standards, because I am officially done trying." And with that, I hung up the phone. Over the next few days, my phone was blowing up. She was sending these massive, novel-length text paragraphs. It was all about how badly she'd screwed up, how desperate she was to fix things, and how she'd finally confronted her friends and set some real boundaries with them. I read every single one of those texts, but I didn't type a single word back. Then, about a week after I'd fully moved into my new sublet, a text popped up from a number I didn't recognize. It read, "This is her friend, the one from college. We need to talk. Call me." My first instinct was to just hit delete and block the number, but I've got to admit, curiosity got the better of me. I dialed the number. "Thanks for calling me back," she said when she answered. I noticed right away that she sounded completely different than she did at those loud dinner parties. The snobby, performative act was totally gone. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my guard up. "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly. "And honestly, I wanted to explain something that I think you really have a right to know." "I'm listening," I replied. "That night, right after you packed your bags and walked out of the apartment, she actually came back to the party," the friend explained. "She told all of us exactly what went down. She was an absolute wreck, crying her eyes out, saying she'd ruined the best thing in her life. At first, we all did the typical friend thing. We were supportive, telling her it's fine, that you'd cool off and come back in a few days." "Right? Figures," I muttered. But then one of the other girls in our group, the one who's always taken the biggest shots at you, she opened her mouth. She said, "Well, look at the bright side. Now you can finally start dating someone who's actually worth your time." Like you walking out the door was some kind of massive golden opportunity for her. "Sounds about right for her crowd," I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. "But here is the thing," the friend continued. "Your girlfriend just froze. It was like she completely shut down. She looked at this girl and asked, 'What did you just say?' And the girl just repeated it, looking all proud of herself, saying that now she could find a guy with real ambition, real success, someone who actually matched her status. And, I asked, and your girlfriend just stared at her for a long, heavy moment. Then, very quietly, she said, I just lost the man I love because I was stupid enough to listen to you. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. Then she grabbed her purse and just walked straight out. I followed her out to the parking lot, and we sat in her car and talked. She completely broke down. She admitted she'd been letting us poison her mind against you for months. She said every single time we threw a jab at you, she defended you a little less and questioned you a little more, until she literally started seeing you through our snobbish eyes instead of her own. I took a second to process that. Why exactly are you calling to tell me all this now? Because I was part of the problem, she confessed. We all were. We judged you simply because you didn't live that conventional corporate ladder lifestyle that the rest of us do. We judged you for being content with your freelancing, for not loudly performing ambition the way we think a successful man is supposed to. We kept pressing her until she finally snapped. Look, I told her. She's a grown woman. She made her own choices. I know she did, and I'm definitely not making excuses for her behavior, the friend said. But I really wanted you to know that she regrets it. She thoroughly, deeply regrets it, and I wanted to personally apologize for my own part in the whole mess. Apology noted, I said. But it doesn't change the reality of where things stand. I know it doesn't, she replied. But for what it's worth, I actually looked up your business after everything blew up. Your client list is seriously impressive, and your design portfolio is incredible. You aren't dead weight at all. You're just unconventional, and we were too blinded by our own narrow definition of success to see it. Anyway, she misses you terribly. She's been completely miserable and won't stop talking about how badly she ruined things. Not my problem anymore, I said flatly. Fair enough, she sighed. I just really thought you deserved the full context of what happened. And she hung up. I just sat there on my couch with that information weighing on me for a good while. It was a weird, heavy feeling. On one hand, I felt completely vindicated. I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't wrong about her friends. But on the other hand, it just made me incredibly sad. To give you another update on how things tracked after that. Over the next few weeks, I buried myself completely in my work. And honestly, paid off. I ended up landing 2 massive new clients. Just one of those projects by itself brought in more cash than 3 months of my usual average income. It's funny how the universe works. The exact moment I finally had the mental bandwidth and the time to chase bigger fish, the opportunities just started lining up. Meanwhile, my ex kept trying every possible way to get in touch. Calls, texts, you name it. She even showed up at this local coffee shop she knew I went to all the time. I actually spotted her through the front window before I walked in. So I just turned right around, pretended I didn't see her, and walked to a completely different spot down the block. Maybe it was a little childish on my part. Sure, but I just wasn't in a place where I was ready to have that conversation. Then, about a month after the breakup, I got an invitation to speak on a panel at a regional design conference. It wasn't a massive convention, but it was highly respected in our industry. I almost turned it down, but my old mentor basically forced me to go, telling me it would be killer exposure for my business. The panel ended up going smoothly. Afterward, during the mixer, I was doing the usual networking thing, shooting the breeze and swapping contact info with a bunch of potential corporate clients. And that is exactly when I saw her. It turns out she was at the conference representing her firm, since her company had actually sponsored one of the big vendor booths in the main hall. We locked eyes from completely across the crowded room. The second she saw me, she started making a straight beeline through the crowd toward me. My first instinct was to just bolt for the exit, but I stopped myself. Running away felt cowardly, and I wasn't going to live like that. So I stood my ground and waited for her to approach. Hey, she said, stopping in front of me. Hey, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. I had no idea you were going to be here, she said, clearing her throat. You were really fantastic on the panel, by the way. Thanks. I appreciate it. Cue the most painful, awkward silence you can imagine. She looked incredibly exhausted, and honestly, she looked quite a bit thinner than she did a month ago. "How have you been?" she finally asked. "Busy," I told her. "I've got some really solid projects on my plate right now." "That's amazing. I'm really, truly glad to hear that." More heavy silence stretched between us. All around us, people were laughing, clinking glasses, and chatting away, the general buzz of the conference filling up the massive gaps in our conversation. "I've been dying to talk to you," she said, her eyes practically pleading. "I know," I answered honestly. "I've been intentionally avoiding it." "Yeah," she whispered, looking down at the floor. I noticed. "Look, is there any way we could just grab a coffee or something? Just somewhere quiet where we can actually hear each other think?" Every logical part of my brain told me to say no. It told me to just turn around, walk away, and keep the clean break we already had. But deep down, I was still curious. And if I'm being completely honest with myself, even if I hated to admit it at the time, there was a small part of me that was still holding on to a shred of hope. "Sure," I told her, nodding toward the glass doors. "There's a little place right across the street." So we ducked out of the conference hall, walked across the asphalt to this quiet little cafe, and ordered a couple of drinks that neither of us actually wanted to touch. We walked over to a booth tucked away in the back corner and slid into the seats, sitting face to face for the first time in a month. She looked at me across that little cafe table, took a deep breath, and started with, "I'm so sorry." She cleared her throat and kept going. "I know I've already said it in my texts, but I really need to say it to your face. I was completely wrong. Wrong about everything, wrong about how I treated you, wrong for actually listening to my friends, and wrong for not recognizing your true worth." I just sat there, looking at her, and let out a heavy sigh. "Okay, is that really all you brought me here to say?" She blinked, looking a bit taken aback. "What exactly do you expect me to say back to that?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Am I supposed to tell you it's totally fine? Because it's not fine. You looked me in the eye and told me I was nothing but dead weight. You let your little clique of friends tear me down to pieces for 6 straight months, and you made me feel like I wasn't enough." "I know," she whispered, her eyes welling up. "And honestly, I absolutely hate myself for it. I've spent this entire past month realizing just how much I took you for granted, and how incredibly good you actually were to me." "Notice the past tense there," I pointed out. "Were." She flinched a bit at that. "Yeah, were. Because I'm the one who ruined it. So where do we go from here? Do you accept my apology and we just pretend everything is magically back to normal?" "No," I replied, shaking my head. "I don't expect that at all. I just desperately wanted you to know that I finally see the whole picture. I see how wrong I was. I see how much I let a bunch of outside opinions dictate my own reality instead of trusting my own experience with you. You were never the problem here. I was, and my friends were." "Look, your friends were definitely a massive part of it," I told her, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "But at the end of the day, you're the one who chose to listen to them. You're the one who allowed their toxic judgment to become your own personal judgment. That part is entirely on you." I set my cup down and looked right at her. "When you first spotted me across the room today at the design conference, did you notice something? I looked genuinely happy, didn't I?" She nodded silently. "Yeah, well, that's because I actually am happy. Or at the very least, I'm finally getting there. I'm not constantly walking on eggshells anymore, spending every waking hour wondering if my career is successful enough, or if my life is impressive enough to meet someone else's arbitrary standards. I'm just putting my head down, doing my work, and living my life for myself." "I'm really glad," she said, her voice soft. "You honestly deserve that." "So do you," I told her. "But you are never going to find that kind of peace if you keep letting your friends define your self-worth and the worth of everyone around you." "I know," she said. "I've actually been completely distancing myself from them since that night. Ever since I realized how badly they poisoned my perception of you." "Good, because from where I'm sitting, they sound incredibly toxic." "They are," she admitted. Or at least that whole group dynamic is. To be honest, I don't even know if I can fix those friendships, or if I even want to anymore. We ended up sitting in that booth for another hour, just talking everything through. We talked about exactly where things went off the rails, what we probably could have done differently, and whether there was even a microscopic path forward for us. But by the time we reached the bottom of our coffee cups, we both knew the truth. There wasn't a path back. There was just way too much structural damage done. Too much deep-seated resentment on my end, and a mountain of guilt on hers. As we stood up from the booth to leave, she looked at me one last time. I truly hope you find someone who sees you exactly the way you deserve to be seen. And I hope you finally learn to see yourself clearly, I responded. Instead of through the eyes of a crowd, we shared a quick, brief hug. It was awkward, heavy, and incredibly sad. And then we walked out the door and went our completely separate ways. Update 3. That coffee shop conversation happened about 3 months ago, and we haven't exchanged a single word since. I did happen to hear through some mutual acquaintances that she ended up going to therapy. Apparently, she's doing some heavy lifting on herself, trying to work through her people-pleasing tendencies and figure out why she let her peer group influence her life choices so much. Honestly, good for her. Genuinely. I hope she figures it out. As for me, I've started dipping my toes back into the dating pool. I'm not rushing into anything serious right now, but man, it is incredibly refreshing to meet people who actually respect what I do for a living instead of trying to mold me into some kind of corporate clone. Just last week, I actually ran into one of her old friends. Not the loud ringleader of the group, but one of the girls who was always kind of on the periphery. We happened to be eating at the exact same restaurant, just sitting at different tables. As I was paying my bill and heading for the exit, she stood up and approached me. "Hey," she said, looking a little nervous. "Can I talk to you for just a second?" My muscles immediately tensed up. "Sure. What's up?" "I just really wanted to say I am so incredibly sorry for how our group treated you," she said, looking me dead in the eye. "We were judgmental, we were cruel, and you didn't deserve a single bit of it." I took a second, letting the guard down a bit. "Thanks," I said. "That actually means a lot coming from you. The truth is, I'm not even friends with most of them anymore," she confessed, "including the main girl who always went out of her way to be so incredibly hard on you. Turns out, she's just like that about everything and everyone. The second your ex stopped hanging around, she immediately went looking for a brand new target to tear down." "Sounds absolutely exhausting," I muttered. "It really was. I definitely don't miss the drama. Anyway, I spotted you across the room and just really wanted to clear the air. You look like you're doing really well for yourself." "I am," I told her, letting out a real smile. "Finally." "Good," she smiled back. "You earned it." She walked away, and I went out to my truck. I sat there in the driver's seat for a few minutes just processing that whole interaction. It felt like a massive weight lifting off my shoulders. It felt like that entire chapter of my life was finally, officially closed. Date 4. It's been a full 6 months now since I packed my duffel bag and walked out of that apartment. My freelance business isn't just surviving, it's absolutely thriving. I finally reached the point where I hired a dedicated assistant to handle all the administrative headache, raised my rates across the board, and started being way more selective about the clients I take on. Those were all major business moves I'd been way too insecure to make in the past. I used to worry that if I set hard boundaries or had a slow month, I'd look unstable or unsuccessful to her and her friends. But it turns out, when you aren't wasting all your mental energy constantly defending your career choices to people who don't even understand how the industry works, you actually have the energy to excel at your career. I did hear down the grapevine that my ex recently landed a big promotion at her firm. Good for her. I also heard she's currently dating a new guy. He's someone from her company, occupying the exact same level of the corporate ladder that she always craved. When I heard the news, I felt absolutely nothing. No sting of jealousy, no wave of regret. Just a mild, passing acknowledgement that we're both successfully moving forward with our lives on completely separate tracks. Looking back over these past 6 months, I've realized one major thing. That relationship didn't die the night she made the deadweight comment. It had been dying for a very long time before that. It died a little bit every single time she laughed along at her friends' snide jokes at my expense. It died every time she compared my flexible freelance schedule to her rigid corporate hours and found mine lacking. It died every single time she introduced me to new people and I could hear a faint hint of an apology in her tone. That final comment wasn't the start of the end. It was just the exact moment I finally heard out loud what had been said in the silence for an entire year. I'm actually seeing someone new now, and we've been together for about 2 months. She's a professional photographer, so she completely gets the freelance lifestyle. She understands the whole feast or famine income cycle, the immense freedom, the late-night stress, and the deep satisfaction of building a business with your own 2 hands. We actually met at a local gallery opening and instantly bonded over our shared love for creative work. Just last week, she met a few of my closest buddies for the first time. Afterward, one of my guys pulled me aside and said, "Man, she is really into you. Like, her whole face just lights up the second she starts talking about your design work." It was such a simple, passing observation, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. It made me realize that my ex had never once lit up when talking about my career. She tolerated it, she rationalized it, and she constantly excused it to her friends, but she never once actually celebrated it. That right there is the ultimate difference. That was the exact thing I never even realized I was missing. Date 5. It's been 9 months now. It's almost wild how time flies, because at this point, the entire relationship with my ex feels like a story that happened to a completely different guy. I've moved into a much better apartment, a beautiful 1-bedroom with a dedicated office space. My assistant actually became my official business partner, and the 2 of us are currently touring commercial office spaces downtown. The workflow is steady, predictable, and incredibly fulfilling. Then, out of nowhere last month, an email from my ex popped up in my inbox. The subject line read, "No response needed, just needed to say this." It was a really long email. She explained that she'd been working consistently with a therapist to finally understand her behavioral patterns. She talked about how she'd been desperately seeking validation from her college friend group since her graduation day, how she'd never actually developed a strong, independent sense of self outside of that circle, and how she'd unconsciously projected all of her own deep-seated insecurities about success and status directly onto me. She apologized to me all over again. She admitted she'd learned a lot of hard truths about herself through therapy, and she didn't particularly like the person she discovered. She said she truly hoped I was doing well, and confessed that she often thinks about our old relationship as a massive cautionary tale about completely losing sight of what actually matters in life. But it was her very last paragraph that really stuck with me. She wrote, "You were completely right that night in the bedroom when you told me I wanted someone who matched my energy. I did, but I had foolishly defined energy as ambition that looked exactly like mine, success that fit in my corporate box, and drive that mirrored my own. I was completely blind to the fact that you possessed all of those exact same qualities, just in a totally different form. You matched my energy better than anyone ever has before or anyone has since. I was just far too influenced by people who didn't matter to see what was right in front of my face." I ended up reading those words twice through. Honestly, I felt way more sadness for her than anger. It's a tragedy to lose something completely real and genuine just because you can't bring yourself to trust your own gut judgment. That is an incredibly bitter pill to swallow. I honored her request and didn't type out a response, but it definitely made me think. It made me realize just how terrifyingly easy it is to completely lose your identity in the opinions of others, how insidious social pressure truly is, and just how much raw courage it actually takes to trust your own life experience over the loud consensus of a crowd. Final update. It has officially been a full year since the night I walked out. To be honest, I barely ever think about her anymore, except for the rare moments when something specific triggers the memory, like sitting down to write this out. The whole relationship has finally transformed into a simple data point in my personal history, rather than a raw, painful wound. I'm still with the photographer, and we actually made the decision to move into a house together last month. Our relationship is just easy in a way that my previous one never was. We have a deep, mutual respect for each other's professional lives, we champion each other's personal goals, and we refuse to let outside voices dictate our internal reality. Her friends genuinely like me, my friends absolutely love her, but most importantly, we love and respect each other completely independent of anyone else's stamp of approval. I actually crossed paths with my ex one final time at a crowded professional networking event downtown a couple of weeks ago. We were both working the room, doing our respective things, when we caught each other's eye from across the convention floor. She gave me a small wave, I offered a polite wave back, and that was the absolute end of it. No dramatic, lengthy conversations, no exhausting deep dives into the past. Just two people who used to be everything to each other, politely acknowledging a familiar face, and moving on with their lives. And honestly, I think that is the absolute best possible ending to the story. No cinematic drama, no lingering bitterness, just over. When I look back on it now, the thing about that dead weight comment that still gets me is just how beautifully efficient it was. It cut straight through years of a relationship and reduced everything we built down to two ugly words, completely exposing a fundamental lack of basic respect. In a weird, twisted way, I'm actually incredibly grateful she said it. It saved me from wasting another 2, 3, or 5 years of my life inside a relationship that was already completely dead on the vine. She wanted a partner who matched her specific energy, and I wanted a partner who respected mine. We both finally have exactly what we wanted, just not with each other. And as for those friends who worked so hard to convince her I was inadequate, I recently found out that entire college friend group completely imploded. Turns out when you build a circle based on pure toxicity, constant competition, and relentless judgment, it eventually eats itself alive. They all scattered to different cities, different friend groups, and different lives. The ringleader apparently developed a massive reputation in her industry as someone who is completely impossible to maintain a friendship with. You can call it karma, or you can just call it natural consequences, depending on how you look at things. Every now and then, my mind will wander back to that rainy night, standing in the bedroom throwing clothes into my duffel bag while she sobbed by the door, asking me why I wasn't willing to stay and fight for us. The real truth is I was fighting. I was just finally fighting for me. I was fighting for my right to be considered enough exactly as I am. I was fighting for my own dignity, and I was fighting for a future where I didn't have to constantly prove my worth to a person who had already decided I was lacking. Telling her, well, then don't carry me, was hands down the absolute best thing I ever said in that relationship. It instantly stripped the power away from her and her toxic friends, and placed it right back where it belonged, in my hands. It allowed me to walk out of that apartment with my head held high instead of begging on my knees to be seen differently. And when her friend muttered, "Now you can finally date someone worth your time," right after the door shut, it was poetic justice. It showed my ex the exact nature of the people she'd been taking life advice from, and the toxic swamp she'd been marinating in for years. Sometimes, people just need a stark, brutal moment of total clarity to finally see what's been glaringly obvious to everyone else the whole time. I genuinely hope she's happy out there in the world. I hope she's finally learned to trust her own heart, and I hope she found a circle of friends who actually build her up instead of tearing down everyone around them. I really do mean that. But more than anything, I hope she walked away from the wreckage of our relationship understanding that letting other people define your love life is the absolute fastest way to destroy it. As for me, I learned the hard way that walking away with your dignity intact beats fighting for measly scraps of respect every single time. I learned that the right partner will always celebrate the path you've carved out for yourself, rather than constantly comparing it to someone else's. I learned that calling someone dead weight says a whole lot more about the character of the person saying it than the person they're trying to describe. And above all else, I learned that sometimes the trash truly does take itself out. You just have to be strong enough to let go of the bag.